Now, it's not often that I get the chance to speak Japanese, but this month, however, I've learned a new Japanese word that I won't be using during the forthcoming Japanese Grand Prix. The word is Jordan, and in Japanese, Jordan means joke, I gather. However, if my next guest has his own way, he'll be having the last laugh. It's the 17th and final Grand Prix of the season on November the 1st, so we're talking about motor racing in October. One of the biggest players in the world of Formula One. Will you welcome, please, Eddie Jordan? Eddie, welcome.
No, great pleasure. Thank you.
When were you first infected with the bug of motor racing?
Well, I think it was the first encounter I had with Formula One was 1970. There was a bank strike, as there were often at that time in Ireland, and I'd had enough of that particular situation and went to Jersey. Worked night and day in a bar and saved my money to go karting every weekend. And once I'd started the karting, it was a bug. And I found great difficulty in kicking it, so to speak. And rather than kick it, I made a shot at it to see was I any good. And was quite fortunate, won a couple of championships in karting, and but then wanted to see what the international scene was like. But that's effectively how I started.
With karting?
Karting.
And the next step from karting, we'll come back to your early life, which fascinates me too, but after karting, the next move was what?
It's like anything. There is at that stage, every driver sees the ladder, so to speak, as karting, Formula Ford, Formula 3, Formula 3000, and then on to Formula 1 if you were ever good enough. And, you know, that was, there were all sorts of other formulas, but for me, they were sort of a distraction. People went into sports cars, but if you wanted to be a top-line driver, a future world champion, that was really the criteria that you had to adhere to, those particular steps.
And you drove until 1980, didn't you?
I probably drove sometimes after that. I drove for the Porsche team in World Sports Cars 81 and a little bit of 82, but effectively I'd hung my hat up, so to speak, 1980, end of 1980.
And what was your most exciting race as a driver?
Well, it's probably so long ago, it's all a blur now, to be quite honest. I'm not sure there was that many good ones. But, you know, I won a Formula Atlantic Championship, which was a little bit like Formula 2, and that was very exciting because it also encompassed races in Britain and some in Europe. And I felt I was on my way at that stage. There were a number of times. At that stage, motor racing was not anything like as safe as it is now. The safety aspect in current Formula One cars is quite amazing. Then, of course, if you had a crash, you hadn't got the structure around you to save you. So I had a lot of injuries, and that mixed with some bad times, but some very good times. But it's very hard to single out any one race.
And Jordan Racing began its life, 1991, really?
Well, Jordan Grand Prix in 1991, there was almost a decade there from 81 to 91, and that was probably our most successful time. And to some respect, probably the most enjoyable time, because you remember very much the times that are pleasurable or successful. And we won the Formula 3 championship, bringing on people like Johnny Herbert won the championship, a young British driver who has an amazing talent. In 85, Damien Hill drove for us. And then in 89 was probably on the international scene, which is, if you like, the second division to Formula 1, Formula 3000. We won that championship and won more races than any other team had ever done at that stage with a driver, ex-Ferrari driver called Jean Alesi. So that was, if you like, the kick into Formula 1.
And in terms of Formula 1, you mentioned Damien Hill there, who's now driving for you in Formula 1. What would you say are the key qualities that a top Formula One driver needs? I mean, is it the daring? Is it the judgment? What is it?
Well,
what makes a difference between
I'm not sure daring really comes into it that much anymore. I think you need an abundance of talent, and there's no better exponent than the great Michael Schumacher. And, you know, he is applauded by almost everybody, even by his own colleagues or competitors in the field, as being perhaps the best driver currently in Formula One. And I would go along with that suggestion. But I think he is enormously talented. He is entirely dedicated to his job. Nothing comes before it. He trains incredibly hard. And I think he is psychologically tuned into it. He doesn't veer in any shape or form away from the job in hand.
And when you say talented at what?
Well, he has an ability to avoid accident. He has an ability to go at breakneck speeds that really, for me, who's been in the business for virtually 30 years, I find immense pleasure watching this person through various corners, how he puts the car into the corner, the speed he's able to attain, and the control that he has at his fingertips. And, well, fingertips mostly nowadays. Everything used to be at your feet. It's now all on a steering wheel. But so just the speed and the ability that he has, that type of talent. For me, inside the business, there is no finer enjoyment that I get at a race than watching him perform.
And how much does it cost? About £30 million, roughly, to run a Formula One team for a year?
I would be honest and say to you that currently 30 million would be the bottom half of the scale. It's very difficult to quantify it, of course, if you were to take in isolation perhaps Ferrari. There are arguments by the time they pay for their engines, pay for the drivers, because Michael is on a fairly serious amount of retainer there. And, there is an argument that $160, $180 million would not be enough to complete their total annual budget. So they are an extreme. Then there are others which are reliant on large amounts of commercial revenue, which likes McLaren and Williams, and then to a slightly lesser extent Jordan and Sauber and Walkinshaw and many of these other teams, all vying for a similar kind of funding, but around the $60 million a year mark. And the reason I talk in dollars is mainly the currency in Formula One seems or appears to be that currency.
And why would it be worth Ferrari to spend that amount of money? Or do they get that all back in sponsorship?
They would achieve a lot of it back in sponsors. I think Philip Morris have been there for a huge number of years. The tyre companies, the fuel companies, and our own Asprey. You see Asprey on there now. And there are a number of different people. But I think there's probably a shortfall, if they were honest with themselves. I'm sure there's a shortfall of 50 or 60 million. And that comes out of what we understand is the advertising budget for the Ferrari cars. Which at this current moment in time are enormously successful. So that publicity or that promotion, that marketing exercise is proving to be a very fruitful one.
At that point in the proceedings, Eddie, let's hear a piece of music that you would like to hear.
Well, I think we're approaching midterm now, and there's no better piece of music. Goes back a long way. Alice Cooper, School's Out.
School's Out. What a...
I'm an old rebel, I'm afraid.
Yes,
an old
you are.
hippie.
A young rebel. A
well,
young rebel.
Not so young anymore.
He's looking very youthful here as he listens to Alice Cooper. Let's go back to the beginning now, Eddie, having talked a bit about the present. I was fascinated in your childhood and the fact that you very nearly took up holy orders.
Well, there's not many people who would agree with that, and they find some sort of element of fantasy about that particular remark. But, it is true. I went to a school which was run by priests, Christian Brothers, Sing Street. It's quite a famous school. They say to get into Irish radio or television, you had to go to Sing Street. So the great Gay Byrne and all his, your colleagues on the other channels, all went to that school. So, it was a fascinating school. To say they rammed religion down your neck may be a touch of an exaggeration, but only a touch. I think everyone that was confirmed there all took the name Mary because the name of the school was Sancta Maria. So I'm Edward Patrick Mary Jordan. And
no.
Absolutely. So the next best thing I think was going to be a priest. There's a lot of people who chuckle loudly when they think of that particular scenario. But anyway, that is the reality. I did think about it and I thought long and hard about it because I felt that there was a calling. But, it's easy to dismiss it now. But at the time, either through, I won't say advice or coercing or something like that. It's just I felt that, perhaps I could do good in that area.
But what persuaded you not to do it? Did your parents not want you to do it? Or?
Oh, I think in Ireland it's quite clear, certainly in those days, and we're talking right a few years ago now, the format of the family upbringing was that you either followed in the footsteps of your father, the eldest son would follow in the footsteps of the father if that was the case. And if that wasn't possible, then you seriously looked at becoming a priest or entering some religious order. That is not necessarily the way things are now, but it certainly was as I was growing up.
But instead you opted for the earthly route towards security and safety, namely banks.
Well, The thing is that I was clearly at that stage. I was between minds. My father's family were either lecturers in dentistry or dentists themselves, and I felt that I was being pushed in that area. But my mind was always much more familiar with figures. I was a budding accountant, really. I was pulled into that area. My dad was an accountant. And as a result, banking was the easiest format. I was going to try to rise up through the normal procedures into corporate banking, and which is what I endeavoured to do. So I studied the Institute of Bankers. I did cost and management accountancy. And I set myself up for a nice, steady, safe, secure job in life.
But also, Eddie Jordan was even then inventive, because you were earning a bit on the side from the car park, or where was it?
Oh, look, there's these stupid, scurrilous remarks.
Scurrilous?
Absolutely.
Tell us more.
Well, they used to suggest that I would give loans to unsuspecting young ladies and young boys who wanted to buy their first car, and I could arrange the loan, but I would also supply the car. But this is absolute nonsense, total fantasy. No one could possibly believe that.
Of course not. It's just that it appears in every single article about you. So.
I'll have to get around to suing all these people in time.
How else did you raise money on the side? One was selling slightly out-of-date smoked salmon.
Well, you know, in Dublin one had to survive, and there were requirements needed, and motor racing was a very expensive pastime, particularly when you were doing it covertly and making sure that the family had no idea that you were doing it, because motor racing, certainly at that stage, and in a family that it was completely alien, no one had an idea of motor racing. And in fact, only until recently, motor racing has become even reported on, or in fact even become popular in Ireland, but it has become enormously popular. But back in those days, it was a sport that you weren't involved in, or shouldn't be involved in, and it was very expensive. And people generally didn't have the kind of money, so you needed to be reasonably enterprising to come and find the necessary funding that was required to pursue this ludicrous pastime, so to speak. So selling salmon to the French rugby supporters was just a mere day out for the bit of fun and some cash in the pocket to spend on tyres or fuel or whatever needed to be paid for at the particular time. So no problem with that.
And looking back now, who was the greatest influence on your life, your mother or your father? Your mother, it reads as if it was your mother.
Well, yes, I would have to say. My father was a very quiet, understanding man, but my mum, thankfully is still alive, was at her first Grand Prix for many, many years at Monaco only a couple of weeks or months ago. And she's 82 now and in great shape.
And she's the greatest influence. In what sense?
Well, she's a pushy lady. I won't say any more than that. And she was very, Edmund, you have to do this. I was described as Edmund at home, which is not necessarily a name that is familiar to most people. But when I misbehaved or something like that, I would be called Edmund. I always knew when I was incurring the wrath of my mother. It was the way she would speak to me.
Edmund?
Come, Edmund, come here.
And if you were doing all right, you'd be Eddie?
Well, son. Everyone is son.
Son.
Yes, Eddie was not a name that was used. In fact, in the early days, if someone rang up and asked for Eddie, they would say, well, I'm not sure, we don't have an Eddie here, type of thing. But anyway, let's not digress into that realm. They were old times, very pleasurable times, great memories.
I suppose one of the biggest crises in your life, Eddie, was the financial crisis that hit you soon after the start of Jordan Grand Prix, a year or so later. That was tough, and your doctors were worried, and you were worried, and I suppose your bank manager was worried.
Well, no, he was
catatonic. He was
ready to strangle himself, I think. Well, so he informs me now.
What happened? What went wrong?
Well, I think, there's this wonderful fantasy. Formula One was a calling or a desire. It was this drug that I had to have. I had achieved, or the team had achieved, superb success in Formula 3 and 3000, and I felt we needed to make this move into Formula 1. And I, in a cold, calculating accountancy fashion, studied exactly what money I would need. But like everyone else, reality doesn't always set in, and I mentally confused the figures enough to believe that I could do it. But at the end of the year, when everyone had to be paid, there clearly wasn't enough in the pot to do that. So it did need a huge amount of restructuring and coercing people to accept money on a payment basis and stuff like that. But thankfully, as we sit here, every single person has been paid in full. But in 92, when the crisis actually bit, it was virtually unbearable, because we were going from race to race with absolutely no money. A number of people helped us out. And I'll be forever grateful to those people.
Bernie Eccleston among them, yeah?
Well, Bernie helps most people out. I mean, I wouldn't want to single him out as such, because he himself wouldn't like it like that. But there's no doubt that Bernie was a major influence on us pulling through. I mean, there's probably a number of reasons. I'd gone to him and explained the situation. He doesn't do it for everyone, but I think he saw something in Jordan that might be different, that if they could get over this first encounter, that they might go on to some element of greatness or be a contributory factor to the welfare of Formula One over the next number of years. And I would like to think we have done that.
And what is the blast-off point into the real big time, into, say, the top three or whatever? You've been fifth for 2 years running and so on. What gets you up there in contention for first or second? Does it need an amazing invention or an amazing influx of money, or what?
Well, it certainly could do with both of those aspects, and I'll receive them very gratefully. But nevertheless, we talked about reality there, and a certain element of reality. You know, last year, for example, we finished fifth, and the team in front of us was McLaren. McLaren, as we know, have had a fantastically successful season, and it just is a matter, I believe, a lot of it has to do with continuity with their engine partners. We have a new partner, and it's appropriate that we should be going to Japan with Honda, who have been superb to us, and we're greatly looking forward to that relationship growing and growing to fruition and to success. So I believe I have most of the ingredients now to move forward, but it's a very fine line at the top. 1 minute you can be at the back. I remember earlier in the season we had some terrible times at Monaco, and then we pulled ourselves out of that in quite a good fashion. So it's a very fine line. I don't want to say that we cannot be number one or number two, because, of course, I desperately believe that is possible. It is not an easy position. Otherwise, everybody would be doing it. But in Jordan, I see that there is a hugely different passion. We have this element of a so-called, the closest aspect to a family relationship. And I think the commitment and the people, the sponsors in particular, MasterCard of course, will go on and bring to us, I believe, the success that everybody in the team or associated to the team will derive.
And do you see a growing taste for motor racing from the point of view of the fans or the sporting audience or the television audience? Do you think it's a burgeoning, growing sport?
Well, you know, there's absolutely no question that we see the figures in terms of the television figures. When I started in 91, there was probably 100 million viewers worldwide live every Grand Prix. Bernie has that up now well into 450 million, and a huge influx of the interest, particularly on the way out here, into the Far East, China, Malaysia. It's just a huge growing market. There's a big responsibility on us to deliver good, exciting races, of course, and hopefully that the championship is an exciting championship in years to come, because that's equally important to arouse and create great interest. But it does have other interests and great benefits, commercial, of course, because the interlink of all the world's major corporate players are all in Formula One, and that's very important for us to keep them there.
And safety-wise, you mentioned the difference with the past. Is safety these days as great as it can be? Is it 100%? I
believe that, you know, that dreadful day in Imola when the great Ayrton Senna died, and the fatalities that happened during that particular weekend, for me and everybody a part of it realised that we must not stop at anything that can help us with the safety of, after all, our competitors, which are our drivers. And I believe the new structures and the safety features that the FIA, Max Mosley included, has put in place has absolutely done that. But I do believe they are looking not just in Formula One, but they are doing that on the road, and they are anything that we can possibly learn is then transmitted to the ordinary person on the street, which I think is a very important aspect too.
That's a key thing, that there can be benefits that come
Absolutely.
out of it. At that point, let's have another piece of music.
Well, this should not have any significance on what we're just talking about, is safety of those things. But a dear and a great friend and a fan of the Jordan team, Chris Rea, Road to Hell.
Chris Rea. Chris Rea there, who you will have heard in person sitting in Eddie's seat just a few months ago. Well, we're at the end of our time. A quote from Eddie: "I can't go away on holiday for more than a week and I need 2 mobile phones." Is that true?
I think I've got to go to an area where they're not usable.
Excellent. Well, bon voyage. Thank you
Merci.
very much, Eddie.
Thank you.